Thank you. I brought a tome of books to the podium because I want to first ask the question, how many of you have read the Geneva resolution? Can I have a show of hands, if I may? Paltry. How many have read the Paranagama report that was written? Better. And how many of you are aware that the Paranagama report is only available in English and not in the two national languages, Sinhalese and Tamil? And that it's not available on any website now since the Paranagama Commission was closed. How many is aware of that? That sets the stage for me, and I must thank Father. It's a hard act to follow. I couldn't wear a cassock, but I thought I'll have a tunic that's close to that. Well, first and foremost, let me thank the Sri Lanka Inc. Entity for inviting me here to speak, and Diane, thank you for asking me to do so. I'd like to, I think many of the issues that I want to touch on has been set up by fathers and my previous speakers. Whilst it's easy for us to castigate the United States or Western countries, and I'm sure Diane would be able to give a philosophical and a rather good description of why that is so. I think we cannot let external actors control us. We have to take matters into our own hands if we want to change things, because they are much more powerful. They clearly have a vested interest to protect their interest, and I don't think we can grudge them for that. What's lacking is that we don't have a similar commitment to protect our interest. So that's where it is. In fact, we can take inspiration from the United States or Europe or China or India in the way in which they go about protecting their interest. So we should protect our own interest. The problem is we don't. That's where the problem is. And I think, as Father said, there's a current policy of appeasement. It's an appeasement mentality that seems to be defeating the very purpose of what we expect from the governments to do to protect our interest, national interest. Now, we saw the previous government, whatever criticisms people might level or allege against the previous government was committed to protect the interest of this country, the citizens, and everyone. And in doing so, they refuted and rebuked and rejected anybody telling the government of Sri Lanka as to what they should do and how they should prosecute the war, not prosecute the war, or have a ceasefire, and when to stop, etc. That was the strength of the previous government in being able to stand straight against very formidable pressure. And that ability to stand against that formidable pressure is what's lacking, in a sense, today. So, if you take this Geneva resolution, I brought copies of it, and I'm more than happy to make available the soft copies, because I know a lot of people have difficulties accessing these documents. And hopefully I would ask the organizers to translate the Paranagama report into Sinhalese and Tamil, which the government should do, but they haven't done, right? Because I believe in that report and also in the attachments to that report, especially Major General John Holmes' report. A lot of these allegations that have been leveled against our military has been completely demolished. Now, why do we stand accused in the eyes of the world at Geneva and in the international media and press as a nation that committed genocide, killed 40,000 people, has in effect is culpable of systemic crimes, which goes down to the very top of government, and that we used heavy artillery? The fact that we have effectively denied food and resources to the civilian population, these are all allegations that are not based on any fact. And that has been proven and stated so very eloquently by two Under-Secretary Generals of the United Nations who investigated what went on here. One was David Crane, and the other was Sir Desmond de Silva. Both of them served as Under-Secretary Generals of the UN on many UN war crimes investigation overseas, Sierra Leone and so forth. And they had done their job because their reputations matter to them, and they would not, just because they've been asked by the government of Sri Lanka to assist in developing the second mandate Parangama Report Commission on investigating the last phase of the war, they wouldn't be singing for their supper because they have a reputation to protect. So they're very impartial in the way that they have approached it. And when I have that, I have the report here, and when I read that report, especially Major General John Holmes's report, he says, in no uncertain terms, that in the view of the author, an entirely unique situation, the fact that 290,000 people escaped alive from the no-fire zone. And he says in all his military, I had the privilege of meeting John Holmes when he was here, and he said he has never seen, where he is a hostage specialist, he headed the SAS, a uniquely decorated British military officer. He said he has never seen an army, military, that actually carried out a very difficult operation under strenuous circumstances with both the weather and the international pressure against them, and managed to minimize the civilian casualties and save the lives of 290,000 people. In fact, the military should be celebrated, feted, and actually honored globally for the effort they did, not vilified and crucified in whatever forums as a military that was responsible for genocide or war crimes. In fact, the war crimes, according to many of these eminent international experts, was more or less committed by the LTTE. And they say Adli Balasingham, a woman who hung a cyanide capsule and encouraged children to become child soldiers, that's a war crime. So the government of Sri Lanka can ask for the extradition of Adli Balasingham to be tried here in this country for committing war crimes. Those in the diaspora, if you want to use that word, I don't like the use of that word because that has a different connotation. And that sort of plays into the mindset of the Jewish community, of a community that is being prosecuted. But if you take the Tamil community that lived overseas, who watched snuff films, films that were shot by the LTT when the war was prosecuted, of real blood and gore, of soldiers being mutilated and killed, and I don't want to get into some of the gory details of some of these snuff films, but it's really bad. And then fundraising activities are conducted in those capitals, and funds are sent here. And if they knew that the organization that they were supporting was committing war crimes, like recruiting child soldiers and shooting civilians and holding them hostage, that's also another war crime, then they themselves are guilty of committing a war crime for contributing funds actively towards that cause. And if anybody is politically canvassing and advocating on their behalf in international forums, in making representations to governments on behalf of that organization that is committing war crimes, then again they themselves are culpable of war crimes. So this issue of war crimes, the government of Sri Lanka, if it wants to follow the retributive approach to justice, then there has to be a balance in the way this is prosecuted. But as the good father said, and as we witnessed in 2009, when the government completed the war on the 19th of May, and took 12,000 LTT combatants into the rehabilitation camps and put them back through school and taught them and gave them the opportunity to pass their A-levels, and then settled them back in their home areas back in the north and east. Was that a prosecution of jailing them for life or hanging them for murder? It wasn't. It was a restorative justice process of forgiveness of the very combatants who fought so brutally against our military. They were welcomed, they were carried on their shoulders, they were treated humanely, they were treated like fellow human beings, fellow Sri Lankan brothers and sisters. And the northern Tamil people know that. Although the politicians in the north may pretend that the population in the north is with them, actually a large portion of the population in the north appreciate and admire and value the way in which the military, navy, and the army, less so by the Air Force because the interaction was less, they value how they were treated when they came out from the Vanni, from the last beaches, from that Pudumarikulam beaches. So that is restorative justice. We haven't played that up. So as a country, it was the duty of this government to have conveyed to the world, particularly Geneva, when there was a change in government. Sure enough, we understand the geopolitical reality of wanting to say oust the Rajapaksa regime, let's say because they were pro-China for whatever reason or some other agenda that they had. Now that we had a pro-West government, the government should have put out these points in a very measured, rational way at Geneva. And they could have influenced the Prince Al Said's group of investigators who he appointed to look into this by presenting to them the reports prepared by the experts like Sir John Holmes, David Crane, Sir Desmond de Silva, and the Parangama report, which interviewed some 20,000 people. All of that evidence was there. It was a very thorough report, and that report did not get presented in Geneva. Now this, Geneva and you, in terms of the topic, what did the you in this context, the government? Because they represent us. After all, we give our vote, we delegate our future to them to decide and act on our behalf, because it's a representative democracy that we have. So it was their duty to present this report in Geneva, but they didn't. Why? I had to, despite working in the president's office and at the risk of getting fired or whatever, write a petition and ask the government to present this report. And then because of pressure, finally Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe agreed to present it to Parliament, and he said after presenting it to Parliament, he'll then put it to Geneva. But it never got presented to Parliament before, it was only presented to Parliament after the Geneva sessions were finished on Sri Lanka. So there, right? And then what happened in Parliament when it was presented? They completely misconstrued what was recommended in this report. I don't want, because certain ministers and MPs have parliamentary privilege, so I've got to be careful what I say here. But I put it that Parliament was misled and the country was misled by the way the contents and the conclusions and the recommendations of the report was presented. I'll tell you how it was misled. This Paragama report completely went to the heart of the issue, because the OICL report, or ICHIR report, is entirely based on a very significant document that they basically used to come to the conclusions and the recommendations they made. What was it? The Darusman report. So this document is based on the Darusman report. Now, what does the Darusman report base its conclusions on? It bases its conclusions on a set of fabricated, exaggerated, unsubstantiated allegations against the military. That UN official who wrote the book Cage came up with a figure 40,000, somebody else put another figure, and it was completely unverified, unsubstantiated information that the Darusman report was based on. And the Darusman report did not even have an impartial panel. It had Suka, a Tamil lawyer in South Africa, as one of its members. And Yasmin Suka was subsequently championing a justice campaign after the war was over with funding from the EU and George Soros' foundation. I don't think either George Soros' foundation or the EU quite knew exactly what the agenda of this particular Suka's organization was doing. Because I know these people fund many things without really getting into the details, because not everybody has an agenda, although some of the monies that get funded for NGOs does have an agenda. Fact is that she became the advocate that went on to show pictures of Tamil civilians who usually hang themselves for veil period with hooks in Kataragama and so forth, and looked at those wounds and showed those wounds to be torture that was being carried out by the current government after 2016, 15, right? I mean, that there was torture being carried out in military camps, in the naval camp, by the current government. Let's forget the previous government, right? I mean, anybody who knows how to look at forensic information will know what it was, and obviously, and there was a number of people who were actually mutilated under anesthesia in London in order to claim refugee status and citizenship in those countries, and there is a lot of intelligence information that was shared, and people know about those sort of things that took place. So all of that was refuted in the Paranagama report, particularly by the international experts, the independent international experts. So therefore, it was the right, it was the duty of our government to present this in Geneva. But it didn't happen. Why? I think more than the international conspiracy, Father, it is a personal, political vendetta that has really caused this. Mangala Samarveera, a good friend of mine in the past, now he doesn't talk to me, he actually presented in Parliament in 2014, I believe, somewhere around July, August, at the behest of another schoolmate of mine, of course from a different stream, Sumantiran. He presented in Parliament that Desmond de Silva should be sent off, that he should not be working in this, on the Paranagama Second Mandate report, because he's a man of poor character. Actually, the words were, I think I have it here, he made the accusation in Parliament that Sir Desmond de Silva was, well, basically, the point he made was that he was quoting the IRA, actually. Mangala Samarveera was quoting the IRA, or groups that were supporting the IRA, and in Parliament asked the government to get rid of this man, saying that he was totally unqualified to do this job, quoting the IRA support groups. Now, why did the IRA support groups issue a statement against Desmond de Silva? Because Sir Desmond de Silva was asked by John Cameron to investigate the intelligence services of the British government that was operating in Northern Ireland, and to see whether they had committed any offenses or gone beyond their brief in the way they handled the investigations in Northern Ireland. So whether it is Desmond de Silva, whether it is our good father or anyone who gets appointed by the British government to investigate something in Northern Ireland, the IRA will denounce them. That's a standard practice, right? So I'm Desmond de Silva, Sir Desmond is United, who's been Under Secretary General of the UN, an eminent person, gets denounced in our parliament by our current foreign minister by saying he's wholly unsuited by quoting the IRA. So that's where the spat began. The antagonism towards the Paranagama report, John Holmes's report, Sir Desmond de Silva's report started with this antagonism towards the Rajapaksa regime at the time, and saying that this was a whitewash, this was a committee that has been appointed to completely exonerate the military of all crimes that they have been accused in the Darusman report. I mean, the government appointed it to credibly look at it, because that's the duty of any government. No military commander cannot look into allegations that are being made. It's their duty to do so. That's what they did. And they were following up on the LLRC report. What happened? Government changed. Then they put a petition in Parliament led by Sumanthiran and some other NGOs, I think Pakke Sotis Haranamuthu and a whole lot, basically calling for asking President Sirisena to remove Desmond de Silva and to shut down the Paranagama report, commission work. So this was a personal agenda that got very personalized, and therefore the foreign minister did not read the Paranagama report. Sad, right? Because in it was all the answers to rebut and basically restore the honor of our military and our country, and actually influence many of these international committee members, both in the NGOs, human rights field, as well as in the political field and the military, about what a great military that this country had in the way they conducted the war and saved the lives of 290,000 people. But because of that animosity and because of the animosity towards the Rajapaksa regime, they did not want to use that. So they deliberately sabotaged it, which is why it was not even presented in Sinhalese and Tamil. Right? So this is where it is, the responsibility. Now, I think this group, or any one of us, can actually submit this to the, even though it's late in the day, but I think still believe we should still submit this report to Prince Said and the UN Human Rights Council. Because they themselves in their report request. Now that's the other thing that the government failed. They call for submissions from public and from government and everyone to enable them to come to the right conclusion. And we failed, right? So this is very clear to my mind that because of political animosity, personal animosity, and agendas, we failed to submit the information we had in hand that could defend this country's honor. So what's the upshot of that? Still, the GSP Plus that was removed, that is impacting on certain businesses that export things to Europe, is still there because the EU operates on a very liberal, human rights-led mindset. And if they believe a country has not held to the high standard that they themselves have, and if particularly if the UN Human Rights Council has deliberated and concluded that a particular country is falling short of its humanitarian obligations, then they think, well, this country needs to be checked and brought in line. But unfortunately, we have been accused of a wrong that we are not guilty of. So, as civil society activists or people who have some sort of interest, we need to put pressure, and that's what I try to do with Dan and a few of us, to get the government to do this, but they refused. They were stubborn. And to this day, they were stubborn. And during this period when The UN, US Undersecretary of State, Bishwal, and that gentleman who was handling their human rights came to Sri Lanka with the draft copy of the OICL report. I think it was like the 8th or whatever, just before August, when I think July it was, when they came. He should have consulted Sir Desmond de Silva, who was here in the country. Government was paying him. So here we have experts that we pay to give us advice. We don't use them to defend our country. So this is why my topic, I requested that we need to look at the institutionalized process, the process management of how our country handles matters. We have to have a system that is transparent and accountable to the people and takes into consideration all facts and available material to them to defend. Sitting officers in the military can't come and talk like this, like I do. I am working in the government, but certainly I will not get court-martialed, right? But they don't have that privilege, so they can't talk. And there's suppression, there is fear psychosis. Oh, he is a chauvinist. Oh, he is a racist. Oh, he is this. Labeling. I think you know some of these people are experts at labeling people, right? And then that sort of puts you into a bit of a corner. Oh, you don't want to be labeled. Oh, he's a Rajapaksa man. Or he's this, he's that. And so people just sip up. But who is a racist today? Who is promoting sectarianism in a big way in this country? Who is trying to tinker with our constitution to change the nature of the constitution to make this country ethnocentric? Is it the former government or any other previous government or the military or anyone? No. It's a certain group in this government, mostly NGO, funnily enough, because once the Paranagama Commission was shut down, Office of the Missing Persons was set up, and look at some of the people who are involved and what's the agenda that is being pushed, Constitutional Reform Council, and who is drafting it, right? So we have a issue that I think people are too quiet, are not articulating their views, afraid of being labeled, and I think we need to get out of our comfort zone because none of us are politically aligned to anybody, but we love our country, so we're aligned to our country. This is our country. Where else do we go? So in that context, because time is running out, I like to say that we have to call for these things to be tabled in Geneva. We have to call for the Foreign Ministry and the government and the President's office and the Prime Minister's office to have a transparent process in which people who have information that they can submit can do so, and that they would know exactly how the process works, because Dr. Kohana knows, working in the ministry when he was there. I mean, there are institutionalized mechanisms to have interministerial committees and ways in which you bring civil society. I myself headed up an institution called the National Council for Economic Development, where we brought civil society members, chamber members, and so forth to come and contribute, and minutes were circulated and it was transparent. And the lack of that, and just a cabal, a kitchen cabal, working behind the scenes without showing their hand is the problem that we are facing, because we do not know what's going to happen. And if you think about it, Paranagama Commission says purely domestic mechanism, using the high courts, using the Attorney General's Department, and using a truth and reconciliation process, which is a restorative justice process. Yet, what might be coming, which we suspect, is a change in the Constitution to allow foreign judges to be brought in and so forth. So we do not know. I can't opine on it until we really see the draft. And in parting, and finally, I'd like to say that we do not need to, having endured 30 years of terrorism based on ethnic identity politics, where somebody fanned the flames of identity politics in this country quite vigorously, that we need to now look at a solution that is also based on identity politics. Look at India. Pakistan was separated and created on sectarian lines as a Muslim state. India was supposedly secular, but largely Hindu. Has that brought about amity and reconciliation and total peace in the northern part of the Indian subcontinent? No. Two armies on their borders, nuclear missiles pointing at each other. Is that the future that we want in our country? I mean, we are lucky that we're born in an island. We only have the ocean around it. And therefore, if the government is contemplating any sort of administrative borders, it ought to be done on scientific principles, which is watershed. Because climate change is upon us, and we need to look at administrative districts and boundaries based on our rivers and the way our forest watersheds are structured. And that's the way in which we got to look at it. And certainly, we have got to move away from political delimitation process that is entirely fixed on caste, creed, race basis. Thank you.